Hey everyone, welcome back to D Squared Stories, a weekly audio fiction podcast. This week we start our new story, The Wonderful Baking Lodge. Our story follows An, a young woman who is invited to compete on her favorite reality baking show. As the competition gets underway, An is slowly faced with the realization that something is not exactly right with this wholesome TV show, and that she may be competing for much more than a spot in the finals. A fun little thing for this season I want to talk about is that our protagonist, Anh Thang, is Vietnamese, and to really lend the authenticity of her character, each episode of this story is going to feature a Vietnamese bake/dessert inspired by a different Vietnamese cooking blog. Today's episode features 2 cakes from Vicky Pham at vickypham.com. So if they sound as delicious in the story as they sounded to me, go check out our blog for the recipe. And as always, if you like this story, please like, comment, subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to it. I say this at the beginning of every story not just because it helps with the all-powerful algorithms who decide to put this in front of people, but because it's nice for me to know that you enjoyed it. Of course, if this is the type of story you think someone else would like, please share it with them as well. But above all else, thank you for listening, and without further ado, let's get started. Chapter 1. Piece of Cake. My alarm went off at 3:30 in the morning, just as I had set it, and I never leapt out of bed with such energy in my whole life. My wife, Leah, groaned as I ran around our room with the energy of a child on Christmas morning. I brushed my teeth, washed my face, and picked out my cutest outfit, a summery dress with a tropical floral pattern. I could hardly contain my energy as I let out high-pitched noises every couple of minutes. Leah finally dragged herself out of bed and rubbed her eyes. "I take it you're every bit as excited as you were last night, An," she said to me, sounding exhausted. "Of course I am, Leah. It's the Wonderful Baking Lodge," I almost screamed. "I'm going to go there. I'm going to bake in the lodge for Peter Broadway and Penelope Lay." Despite her absolute exhaustion, she smiled. My zealous excitement was too infectious, and she of all people was susceptible to it. I finished my morning routine, grabbed the 2 big suitcases I had packed the night before, and ran down, grabbing a breakfast bar and rushing into Leah's car, before she could even pour herself her homemade cold brew. She rolled her eyes at me as I sat bobbing up and down in the passenger seat with uncontrollable glee. "So they're just going to blitz this whole season over the course of basically a week, if I remember right," she said. "That's right. It's normally a week-by-week ordeal like we see it on TV, but this season, probably due to budget cuts, it's going to be done in 2 weeks. That has to be a production nightmare. Seems like everyone is cutting corners on entertainment these days. What's next? An audiobook from a female character's perspective, voiced entirely by a man?" My mind was racing too fast from thought to thought to really pay too much mind to that underhanded comment. Normally, the Wonderful Baking Lodge had 10 contestants to start off, and there would be 7 episodes to each season, 4 days of competition. Each day had 2 separate challenges, and the lowest performer would go home after each challenge. "Oh, are you going to do the thing where you call me to act all excited if you come first on a challenge?" Leah asked. I smirked. "Well, I don't know if I ever will get first, but if I did, yeah. Why?" "Oh, can't you call your mom or something? I feel like I'm going to sound like an unsupportive wife. I don't have that natural energy like you do." "You'll be fine," I said. We drove for a while. Leah was playing some of her favorite metal bands to try to counter the level of fatigue she still clearly felt. Normally, I would beg to listen to anything else, but right now my mind was too wrapped up with the idea of what was happening to care. Peter and Penelope, the judges, the hosts, Tama and Bahama, the lodge, that unassuming little lodge in the middle of the woods, surrounded by cabins that I would get to live in and practice my recipes in. Time seemed to slip through my fingers as we passed through the countryside and towards our destination. The scream of the metal singer synced with my scream of excitement as I saw the sign to turn right for Wonderful Lodge Park. I could sense Leah rolling her eyes, but I could not be the slightest bit bothered to care. It was here. The quaint forest just a bit off the highway filled my view, completely undisturbed by anyone and everything. We started driving into the woods, passing multiple checkpoints where guards seemed to be posted. They never really went into just how deep into the woods this lodge was. It felt like something so surreal. "What the heck? If I had this estate, I would have shot a horror movie rather than host a baking show," Leah said. We pulled up to the last checkpoint. A young smiling member of the production team came up to the window. "Anh Thang?" he asked me. "That's me," I almost squealed. "Alrighty, so happy to have you here. You can get out. Unfortunately, no other personnel further, so we'll have to ask your driver to turn around." I got the sense right away that Leah did not love being called my driver. I quickly turned around, gave her a hug and kiss from the passenger seat, then grabbed my bags and got out of the car. "Bye, Leah. Love you," I said. "See you in a couple weeks." "See ya, my passenger," she said, but in a way that was more playful than spiteful. She spun around the car and was off. In short time, I was walking with the production staff over to the line of cabins. In the far distance, I could see the lodge. Its beautiful dark wood stood attractively in the morning sun. The wood of the cabin seemed almost dinky when looking at the two, but I assumed that was just because nothing could look quite as grand as the wonderful lodge. The young man, still smiling, not having stopped for a minute, handed me a key and a stack of papers. "Here's your key, you're in cabin 107, he said. "And sorry to bug, I know you signed the NDAs, waiver, etc., but legal is on our butts about having a paper copy too. It's really mostly the same stuff if you just wouldn't mind signing it." He quickly spread the papers out in my hand to show me 6 different spots for me to sign and date. Feeling a little under the pressure of it all, I quickly signed them all without looking. Leah would have killed me for something like that, but we already e-signed the same documents, so what could be the harm? He continued smiling and pulled the papers back from me in a hurry. "Then just one last thing. As discussed, your phone will need to be in a lockbox for the duration of filming. We'll bring it back out to you to call a loved one if you place first in any challenges or if you need to call anyone emergently." He held out a box in front of me and I complied, putting my phone into it. The cabin apparently had all the internet access we would need for any recipes and things of the like, but somehow was restricted in the information it could send out. Leah said that was not how internet access worked, and she was a web designer, so I was inclined to believe her. But I also had no reason to want to send out any info about the show either. I hated spoilers as much as anyone else does. "Thank you so much. You can go in and drop yourself off and get settled. Then head over to the lodge and do your intro reels." "Ah, I get to go into the lodge already?" I asked. "Yes, indeed. Please don't scream like that in there, though. They're actively recording your fellow contestants." "Yes, got it. Sorry." I hurriedly ran over to my cabin and pushed my key into it. I grabbed everything out of my bags that I did not want to get wrinkled and hung it up in its rightful spot as fast as I was able to do so. Despite my rush, I did try to slow down and take in the cabin a bit. It had a nice twin bed, a small kitchen corner, fully stocked with all the basic ingredients I would need to practice my baking in between challenges. It had a washroom so small that only a shower, toilet, and mirror barely fit in there. I'm not even sure you could fit one of me horizontally in that thing, and I'm really not that tall. With my visual once over the place complete, I locked my door and immediately ran towards the lodge. With each step, I thought I might burst into flight as I got closer and closer to those stairs. I felt my heart pounding as I started up at a brisk pace. I had to jump backwards to avoid getting hit as someone opened the door. "Whoops, so sorry," I said, holding on to the railing for dear life. A woman with curly blonde hair seemed to scowl at me, as if I was the one who just made her nearly fall down a flight of stairs. "Watch where you're going," she said. I pouted as she stepped right down, not even bothering to look at me. She had a cute white dress on, but her sunglasses looked obnoxiously large. I have no idea what her problem was, but nothing was taking down my mood today. A little more carefully now, I reopened the door and let myself in. I saw some production assistants and AV people working in the lobby. I had to clasp my hands over my mouth. This was where Peter and Penelope went over the judging of the candidates and would give background on some of the challenges they had set up for the bakers. It was so unreal to be seeing this in real life. I went over and tapped one guy who was tinkering with the microphones to get his attention. "Excuse me, which way do I go for the intro reels?" I asked. The man who gazed back at me had a fair freckled face and dark brown hair. He stopped and seemed to think really hard about the question. He turned to the hallway on the right and pointed at it. "I think it's down that way and to the..." He paused. "Left or right? Oh, I can never remember." "Yo, Donnie, that's way wrong," another said. "Opposite hallway and to the right, jeez." "Oh, right. Yeah, sorry. Other hallway to the right." I just smiled and thanked them and started down the hallway to the left. I noticed out of the corner of my eye that the other production people there looked really irate at Donnie, which gave me the shivers a bit. I think I could even hear a couple scolding him as I left. That felt so excessive for what was such a simple mistake. I would have figured out if I went the wrong way. I felt bad because, like Donnie, I tend to not be the best with directions myself, even in places I go a lot. I made my way over to the area on the right. Before turning, though, I peeked down the other side and had to suppress a squeal because I think I saw the challenge area. I bit my lip and had to use all my self-control to not go wandering off somewhere I should not be, and went down to the other area. There was a sunroom with a partial patio. I recognized the background as where a lot of the confessionals took place. There was a friendly-looking guy with short brown chestnut hair, who gave me a big smile and wave, but quickly brought his finger to his lips as if to say to be quiet. I looked outside and they were filming another guy. He was crazy tall, with a dark black goatee and tattoos all down his muscular arms. He was not the type of guy I would think to see on a baking show, but years of watching Baking Lodge taught me that bakers come in all shapes and sizes. I listened to him through the window. My name is Marcus Swanson. Baking to me has always been a way to prove myself, to show just how far I can go when I push myself. It's like my other hobbies, such as boxing, skydiving, hiking the world's tallest mountains, and powerlifting. Sheesh, he talks about these heavy time commitments like he would talk about a daily jogging habit. Must not have much going on at home. My wonderful wife Jessica and I have 8 kids and 3 dogs. She works for vice president of IT at a major company, and I work as a stay-at-home dad where I get plenty of time to practice my baking for critics so harsh, Peter would look like he has kid gloves on in comparison. What a life. Gosh, I feel like I'm so boring in comparison. What do I even say to feel remotely in the same league as that? The audio guys gave a thumbs up and started to take off all of the what seemed to be excessive to me audio equipment they had him hooked up with. Pretty crazy, right? Chestnut hair next to me said. He and I were talking a bit before he went in there. I'm Dylan, by the way. Dylan Yoder. He stretched out his hand and gave me that pearly white smile again. I smiled back and shook it. My name's Anh Thang. It's so nice to meet you. I felt his hand squeeze mine tightly. There was also a strange sparkle in his eye now. Oh, wow. That's a really beautiful name. Something felt a bit uneasy to me as he kept shaking my hand, seeming to hold on a bit too long for my liking. I tried to change the subject as I finally pulled my hand away. Was there another contestant who came in here earlier? A blonde woman? That seemed to break the magic in his eyes. Ugh, yeah. That was Cheyenne Michelle, or so she says her name is. So she says? I asked him. What does that mean? I was in here for 5 minutes, just trying to make small talk and introduce myself, and getting nothing but her checking her watch. Then she goes in there and she's the bubbliest person on camera I've ever seen. I don't trust anything about her to be real now. That's quite a snap judgment to make on someone in only a few minutes, I said. Despite this, I did certainly get the sense, unless something was going really wrong for her today, that she was not a super pleasant person. Dylan looked to me like he wanted to try to defend himself a bit, but was being called in as Marcus was let out the booth. Marcus gave us both a pleasant smile and wave as he went to his cabin. For a moment, I wondered who was watching the 8 kids he had for the duration that he would be here. I had hardly a moment to ponder this when someone came shambling down the hall. He was a tan-looking skinny man who looked like he had seen a ghost. He came running up towards me. The sound clearly interrupted the intro for Dylan as everyone on the other side of the glass looked over at us. There's a chair in there. None of us are safe, he said. He seemed to be rambling incoherently, or I had vastly underestimated the dangers that chairs pose. 2 production assistants ran back up. One of them said something. It's just a code, Lucy, he said. Already? One of the audio techs said. I told them this was a terrible idea. One of the assistants grabbed the man by the arm and seemed to gently pull him out of the room. He seemed unwilling to go, but did not put up much of a fight. I turned to the other PA. Who was he? Is he okay? I asked. That's Miguel Estrada, she said, looking a little awkward. He's a contestant, great baker, but he's not always, let me phrase this right. He has some mental issues, but the network still wanted to have him on to have a chance to compete. He's not a threat, though. He's never harmed anyone, so I wouldn't worry. I noticed the audio tech seemed to give her a thumbs up, as if they had rehearsed saying things like this. That made sense, though, right? They probably had a couple meetings about Miguel ahead of time to make sure he was well accommodated. That's cool. I love that this show has some disability representation, I said. I bet people at home will love that. It must be like severe anxiety or something, and he's just worked up from being so far away from home? Sure, yeah, she said. You got it exactly right, actually. I thought about how wonderful it was they were making all these accommodations to bring on people from all walks of life into the lodge. The diversity of the contestants each year was one of the things I loved most about the contestants. I love seeing people of different backgrounds bringing their own flavors, and I was really hoping to do all my fellow Vietnamese people proud by bringing our flavors to the lodge. After recovering from the interruption, Dylan wrapped up his introduction and then they moved on to mine. I had tested the boundaries of Leah's patience with me, practicing this every night for the past couple of weeks. Despite that even, I still feel like I managed to ramble a bit, at one point even starting to say the scientific names of the plants that Leah and I grew in our flat. With all that done, it was almost time for the first challenge to start. The PA from earlier specifically guided me from the recording area into the kitchen. It was such a short walk, but for some reason she seemed to not let me out of her sight as she guided me there, which was fine by me. I did a giddy little couple of jumps up and down as I entered and saw the 10 baking stations, ovens and all, set up in the room. A couple of the other contestants laughed at me a little, However, I could see that several others were still taking in the excitement themselves. I stood at the front right baking station, which was so thrilling to me to think that I would have a front row spot to Peter and Penelope as they described what we were going to be baking. I would also have to be careful that Tom and Bahama, the two comedian guest hosts, did not make me laugh too much while I was doing something important. The audio people all got to work setting up the equipment on us. It was a surprising amount of wires that needed to be hooked up to make the magic happen. I had read about that online, but nothing can really explain how much goes into putting everything together. While they were working on me, a friendly voice from behind called out to me. "Well, don't you just look ready for television, sweetheart," she said. "My name's Samantha. Just letting you know I'm going to be copying whatever you're doing for the mystery challenges when I don't know what's going on." I smiled back at her warmly. She looked like a middle-aged woman, with dark hair braided so perfectly. Her light blue blouse looked exactly like the one I had in my closet that I had almost thought about wearing today. "Oh, thank you. I hope you don't mind copying someone who won't know what they're doing." I laughed. "I love your hair, by the way." The two of us chatted for a bit while the audio team worked diligently to finish setting everybody up. They rolled a bit of footage of the cameras to do a test of the equipment and recorded a few candid conversations of several of us talking about how unreal it was to be in the lodge. All pretty standard stuff that you see on the first part of every season of the show. We all went into a hush as the judges and hosts got ready to enter. They counted down on the cameras to start rolling. 3, 2, the one was given with a hand signal. We all smiled and looked on in awe as Peter Broadway, Penelope Lay, and the two comedian hosts walked into the kitchen. They stood in a line before us. Thomas spoke first. "Bakers, it's my honor to welcome you to the wonderful baking lodge," she said. "And bakers, it's my honor to carry Peter's spare socks around with me in case he gets too sweaty from any spicy bakes," Bahama said. We all chuckled a little. The humor was always kind of absurd and random to the point of being cringeworthy, but it was part of the show. Peter just shook his head, completely unfazed with those cool blue eyes of his. "I'm so glad to have 10 new bakers in the lodge. Can't wait to see what you all whip up for us," he said. "Hopefully it'll blow your socks off," Bahama said. "Our first challenge is a cake challenge set by Penelope. Dearest, do you care to tell the bakers what it is?" "Dearest? That's a new one," she said. "Your challenge, bakers, is to create 2 separate cakes, each with a unique but complementary flavor." Since this was an exhibition challenge, we knew what we were going to be making for the past couple of months now at this point. We all had plenty of time to practice these, unlike some of the later-to-come mystery challenges. I felt pretty confident as I got my bowls and flour out and started mixing away. Peter and Penelope started making their rounds to the left of me, where Dylan stood. "So Dylan, tell us what you're going to be making," Peter asked. "So I'm going to be making 1 vanilla cake with lemon icing and 1 carrot cake with cinnamon cream cheese icing on top, and a layer in the middle." I peered out of the corner of my eye. He seemed so earnestly proud of what he was working on, and despite everything around him, did not seem the slightest bit nervous. Peter stroked his chin, taking this all in before responding. "Those are both very classic flavors. They seem a little safe, even. But if you nail them, you're going to nail them." Dylan nodded and seemed determined to do just that. "And the last time that Peter saw someone nail something, they were doing a crucifixion," Thomas said. I rolled my eyes and shook my head, trying to stifle a laugh from the over-the-top nature of the comedian guest hosts. They soon left from Dylan and made their way around. In between working on my own bakes, I did not quite hear everything that everyone was working on. But I did hear that Marcus from earlier was making a dark chocolate cherry cake, along with a raspberry cheesecake, which both sounded delightful. I think I heard Cheyenne say something about a key lime cheesecake and a pistachio cake. Those were 2 of Peter's favorite flavors. Someone was pandering. Suddenly, Bahama popped up in front of me. "An, darling," he said. "Are you excited to be here? Are you nervous to be baking for Peter and Penelope?" A camera was already pointed at us and recording our conversation. "Hey, Bahama," I said. "I am excited, a little nervous too. Trying to work that down. Remind myself it's just baking." He laughed. "That's true, except I hear Peter takes the loser of each challenge out back and executes them." The camera guy shook his head at us and gave a gesture as to say to cut that out. Bahama sighed. "So I can't joke about that at all now. He's like way over there," he said. Dropping his comedian voice, I noticed he gestured over to Miguel, who seemed nervous beyond just the point of getting judged by 2 amazing superstar bakers. I was not sure what he was working on, but his entire body seemed to be shaking as he struggled to measure the ingredients. The poor guy. I felt so bad for him as I looked over towards the station. "Does Miguel think something bad will happen if he doesn't do well?" I asked. The camera operator made a kind of tisk noise towards Bahama, as if to scold him for even letting us veer into this topic of conversation. He's just a little nervous, yeah. Maybe that wasn't the most sensitive joke on my part, he said. Here, the editors will take it from the last thing you said about being a little nervous. He cleared his throat. That's true. If you get too nervous, just imagine Peter in his underwear. I do it all the time when I'm nervous, even if I'm not here. I politely laughed for the camera, and they seemed to take that and then move on to the next station for Tama to go make a joke. I noticed Bahama briefly scowl at them as they left. In all my anxious thoughts about the show, I had always focused more on whether Peter and Penelope would be nice. It never caught my thoughts to think that maybe the hosts would not be as nice as they appeared on TV. Nonetheless, I tried to get back into a groove of baking, and I could hear the two judges interviewing Samantha behind me. I would be up next. I had to get my nerves ready. Ann, would you mind telling us what your 2 cakes will be? Penelope asked. Absolutely, I said. Both of my cakes are inspired by some family recipes. One is a Vietnamese honeycomb cake, and the other is a steamed banana cake. I instantly watched Peter's eyebrows raise at me. Steamed banana cake? Can't say I've had that before. Yeah, it's a Vietnamese bake. It's topped with a coconut cream sauce, and steaming gives the cake a really bouncy, light texture. He seemed to bob his head to the left and to the right, as if he was considering it. Well, I'm looking forward to it. 2 great flavors here. I gave a big smile hearing him compliment my flavors, and then they departed. I went right back into full focus mode on my baking. I felt good going into this first one, because these were bakes that I had years of practice making. The lodge was abuzz with life, as everyone ran around in various stages of making their cakes. It was tempting at times not to just fully stop what you were doing and take it all in, but I kept on baking, only stopping for camera crews to come by and ask for a brief explanation of what I was working on with each step. I made sure to make the banana cake my top priority since I would want some cooling time to be sure I had good control getting the sauce on at the end. The honeycomb cake, which I preferred to simply top with chopped peanuts, would need less maintenance. When it finally came time to top the banana cake, I was pleasantly surprised to find that the time call for the last 10 minutes must have only occurred 2 minutes or so ago. I turned around to my neighbors who were still working. Anyone need a hand with anything? I asked. The show famously was not a cutthroat experience, and contestants often helped one another when they got done early. I was hoping to keep that wholesome energy alive for this season. Dylan smiled back. Nothing here, I'm just doing my decorating. I'm good, honey, Samantha said. I think Miguel might be struggling a bit. With that, I stepped over towards Miguel. Struggling was an understatement. His cakes, both of which I was not entirely sure from appearance what they should be, clearly collapsed on themselves. I also smelled a bit of chili powder as I walked over, which was not a good sign, based on the aversion of the judges to spice. Miguel himself had absolutely shaky hands as he tried to spread some kind of cream cheese frosting over the top. It smelled like hot sauce. I can't do it. I'm gonna fail. I'm gonna end up in the chair, he said. Hey, don't stress out, man. Let me help you. I gently took the knife from his hand, and he seemed to let me. I slathered on liberal amounts of the cream cheese frosting, which by all accounts didn't smell as bad as I first thought it did, and used it as a way of trying to cover up the most egregious flaws of the cake. Miguel still seemed inconsolable. I looked around to see Tama and Bahama just talking with each other and side-eyeing us. That was weird. They were always pretty quick on TV to come over to cheer up contestants who were having a bad time, but they were treating Miguel like he was some kind of dangerous animal. This really rubbed me the wrong way. The time call for 1 minute rang out, and I tried to ask Miguel if there were any last-second things he needed to add, but he was almost incomprehensibly sobbing now. His words made no sense. The only thing that he kept seeming to clearly get out was this talk of a chair that seemed to terrify him so much. Giving up, I gave him a big hug to try to comfort him, and then walked back to my station. All right, bakers, your time is up, Tama said. The judges will go around and judge your cake creations. They went around in a similar order as before. Dylan did pretty well, getting fair amounts of praise from both judges. Marcus, unsurprisingly, got lavish feedback about how well his flavors and textures were. Not much other notable feedback up until Cheyenne, who Peter really loved, but Penelope was not sold on. Guess her pandering paid off. I watched with a grimace as they tried Miguel's. Peter coughed. Way too much chili, bud. I agree, and this is underbaked, almost raw, Penelope added. Better luck next time, Miguel. I watched as Miguel still trembled like a leaf. I felt so bad for him. He was basically living out my nightmare for how this could have gone. Samantha got good feedback on hers as well, maybe a little tepid, with them both not loving the flavors. Then, after all this time, it was finally time for me to go. I watched eyes wide, almost ready to start shaking like Miguel as they took the first bites of the honeycomb. Got a good flavor to it. Peanuts add a good complementary flavor and crunch to the cake, Peter said. Penelope nodded to agree. Then they tried the steamed banana cake. This is quite light and delectable, just like you said it would be, Penelope said. I beamed with pride, but then I noticed Peter had the gravest look on his face. I studied him intently, looking for any sign of his feelings behind that steely expression of his, but he never cracked. Suddenly, he held out his hand for a fist bump. Excellent work. One of the best banana cakes I ever had in my life. Holy guacamole! My jaw almost dropped to the floor as I nearly missed as I got my very first ever Broadway bump. I felt ecstatic as they went off. I was completely speechless. I looked around. Dylan gave me a thumbs up. Everyone seemed to share in the excitement of the first fist bump of the season. All except Cheyenne. At first, I thought she was glaring at me. Then, when I worked up the nerve to sheepishly check again, it seemed like she was actually glaring at Peter. That made sense. All that work to appeal to his specific tastes, and he gave the first fist bump to the unapologetically Vietnamese recipes? Still, I felt like she was being a bit of a bad sport. The host came back over to the center of the challenge area. Bakers, it's so sad that we have to send one of you home today. I wish you could all stay, Bahama said. But the baker going home today is Miguel. I almost stumbled from how quickly they just spat that out. I guess they only add the long pause on TV for dramatic effect. I turned with a sad expression to see Miguel, who seemed to only look disheartened and in despair, rather than his previous state of panic. Weirdly, the production assistants almost immediately guided him out of the area. The remaining bakers now all went to the main lobby area of the lodge as the audio tech crews worked tirelessly one by one to get all their microphones and other equipment off of them. Despite having to use the facilities kind of badly, I patiently waited my turn and ended up being one of the last people to get unhooked. It took me a moment, but Donnie, the man from earlier, was the one undoing my stuff. He was just about done with me, and we were the last two in the room. Which way to the restroom? I asked him. Oh, that'll for sure be down to the right hallway, and then to the right again, he said confidently. Thanks. I ran off in that direction, but could not find anything marked as a restroom. There was a door at the end on the right that seemed to have something covering its title. Maybe a previously gendered restroom, turned unisex but marked poorly? Either way, this was a gamble my bladder needed to take. I slammed open the door and walked in and gasped. Miguel was sitting there, strapped down to a chair with a strange helmet and electrodes attached to his head. He looked completely lifeless. His eyes were wide with terror beyond my imagining and his mouth agape, as if he had been screaming. The windows of the room were boarded up, and he was connected to all this equipment. I noticed a large man in a black hood, who seemed to be disconnecting the electrodes from him. The man seemed to stare at me, but I could not read his expression from behind the mask. Not another one, he said, muffled. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh. I ran out of the room screaming, suddenly so many realizations hitting me at once. Miguel's talk of chairs, his absolute panic about the competition, and everyone's weird attitude around him. He had discovered something he was not supposed to, and now seemingly paid the price. And it sounded like I could be next. I stumbled my way out of the room, completely disoriented. I scrambled and just tried to open every door I could. I heard faint voices. What was that? A voice said. I think it's the sound of you not honoring our deal. It would be a little suspicious if you were my favorite from the start. Just be patient. Now come here. In an absolute panic, desperate to get anyone to see what I just saw to keep me from going crazy, I yanked open the door. When I pulled it open, on the other side was a utility closet, and the two people in there seemed to be making out, only interrupted by my abrupt intrusion. It was Peter Broadway and Cheyenne. I stammered helplessly as my voice caught in my throat. I could only gesture vaguely down towards the hallway. Sheesh, you look pale, Peter said. What are you so worked up about? I gasped breathlessly and ran back towards the door. I pointed at it, but was way too terrified to open it myself. Peter made a show of looking confused and looking back towards Cheyenne for help, but she just shrugged, seemingly annoyed by all of this. Peter knocked 4 times on the door. 2 knocks, separated by a pause, and then 2 more knocks. He waited a bit after this for some response, but it never came. He looked at me as I still gasped for air, and then he slowly turned the knob to open the door. Thank you so much for listening to this chapter of Wonderful Baking Lodge. If you enjoyed, please rate the podcast on the app, give it a like on YouTube, and share with anyone who you think might also enjoy. Today's recipe inspirations came to us from Vicky Pham's Vietnamese steamed banana cake and Vietnamese baked honeycomb pandam cake recipes. You can find those and more of Vicky Pham's recipes on her website at vickypham.com. That's VICKYPHAM.com. Wonderful Baking Lodge is a D Squared Stories production. You can stay up to date with Wonderful Baking Lodge and all future D Squared Stories productions by finding us on social media. That'll be D Squared Stories, just about any of the big platforms. I appreciate you listening and hope to have you listen again next week.